Before this story begins, you need to understand something. The world did not end with explosions, with sirens blaring, or with governments collapsing overnight. It ended quietly, almost imperceptibly. Streets once bustling with life emptied without warning. Offices, schools, and markets became silent overnight. The first signs were subtle: a neighbor missing, a phone call unanswered, a grocery store abandoned. People assumed it was a temporary absence, a minor disruption, a coincidence. But as hours turned into days, the truth revealed itself. By then, the infection had already spread. The quiet was the first enemy, and it killed more silently than any explosion could. Those who survived quickly learned that the world now belonged to the dead, and the living were merely shadows passing through their territories. The outbreak began with silence. At first, the incidents were isolated. A handful of people acting strangely, attacking without reason, collapsing without illness, only to rise again minutes later. Hospitals were the first to report anomalies: patients turning on nurses, screaming and clawing their way through doors, teeth biting and jaws snapping in ways that defied medical explanation. Doctors were baffled, assuming these were extreme neurological cases or rare infections. But within hours, the pattern became undeniable. Families reported missing members who appeared days later, pale, unresponsive, yet moving with terrifying purpose. Entire neighborhoods began to empty as more cases appeared. By the end of the first week, it was clear: the virus was not contained, not curable, and its spread was inexorable. Quietly, efficiently, it began dismantling society. Most people were not killed by zombies directly. They were killed by panic. The first few infected inspired mass hysteria in cities, leading to stampedes, vehicle accidents, and breakdowns of critical infrastructure. Supermarkets became battlegrounds as people fought over limited resources. Streets clogged with traffic slowed evacuation attempts, turning highways into open graves. Hospitals collapsed under the weight of chaos, often becoming the primary sites of death rather than the shelters they were meant to be. Fear moved faster than the virus, and in those first terrifying days, thousands perished without ever seeing an infected person. Survival depended less on strength and more on the ability to remain calm, to plan, to move without alerting the dead. Panic became a second killer, invisible but lethal. The virus does not kill immediately. It incubates quietly in the body, hiding from symptoms, silently reprogramming neurons and muscles. Victims might appear normal, even healthy, carrying on daily activities, unaware of the transformation occurring within. Some become aggressive without warning, while others collapse in the middle of routines. The first bites often happen without notice, as victims are already partially controlled, moving mechanically before conscious thought returns. Families unwittingly spread the virus by caring for loved ones, unaware that contact is now fatal. By the time the first obvious signs emerge: growling, unsteady gait, bloodshot eyes, the infection has already advanced beyond natural treatment or quarantine. Survival relies on recognizing subtle early symptoms and avoiding contact at all costs. Zombies do not feel pain, sleep, or fatigue. A broken leg will not slow them, a crushed rib will not stop them. Their muscles are controlled directly by the virus, bypassing the nervous system. They crawl when legs are damaged, drag themselves when arms are useless, and bite with a ferocity unmatched by living humans. Sleep is irrelevant. Hunger is irrelevant. Time is irrelevant. A destroyed body is only a temporary inconvenience. The virus adapts and continues its relentless hunt. Survivors must understand that their typical human assumptions about strength, injury, or endurance are meaningless in the presence of the undead. What humans fear most: exhaustion, pain. Death does not exist for them. Only persistence remains. They are drawn to sound and movement. Even the faintest rustle, a whisper, or a heartbeat can attract them. One wrong move, one casual step on a loose tile, can summon an entire swarm. Survivors quickly learn to crawl instead of walk, to hold their breath during close encounters, and to plan every motion meticulously. Noise is both an alarm and a beacon, revealing positions even in total darkness. Human instinct for communication becomes a liability. Speech, laughter, and shouting are invitations to attack. Silence becomes a lifeline, and patience becomes a weapon. Living in their presence demands constant vigilance and awareness of how every action echoes through the environment. The infection adapts to environment. In urban landscapes, the undead climb stairs, navigate doors, and even move through broken infrastructure with surprising agility. In forests, they crawl through underbrush and maneuver through obstacles. In flooded areas, they drift or wade, following scent and vibrations. Their ability to respond to terrain is not conscious intelligence, but instinct honed by the virus controlling every muscle and joint. Survivors must consider every surface, every barrier, every shadow. The world is no longer neutral. The dead shape it as skillfully as they hunt within it. Adaptation is constant, and observation is essential. Water spreads the infection silently. Rivers, lakes, and contaminated wells carry the virus over great distances. Entire towns have been wiped out without direct contact as infected water enters homes, touches objects, and contaminates food. Rain amplifies this effect, washing contamination across streets, seeping into shelters, and creating risk in every routine survival action. Survivors must filter, boil, or avoid water entirely. Even a momentary lapse, a sip from a contaminated source, a small wound exposed to rain can prove fatal. Clean water is a rare commodity, and even that rarity carries risk. Animals amplify the threat. Domesticated pets, wildlife, and scavenger species can carry or spread the infection. Rats, birds, dogs, and cats move silently, often undetected, bridging safe zones and contaminated areas. Some species become active hunters, targeting both living humans and other animals to spread the virus further. Humanity is no longer the apex predator. The ecosystem itself aids the dead. Survivors must navigate not only hordes of undead humans, but also animals transformed into vectors of disease and death. Awareness of every movement, human or animal, is crucial for survival. Herd behavior creates constant danger. Even without intelligence or communication, the undead gather into swarms and move as coordinated units. A single noise can trigger convergence from multiple directions. Streets, alleys, and buildings can become trapped zones in seconds. Survivors must constantly assess herd movement, anticipate changes, and plan escape routes that account for the unpredictable nature of collective instinct. Any delay, hesitation, or error can transform safety into immediate peril. Living among the dead requires constant vigilance, understanding, and respect for their relentless presence. The first human settlements to fall were not the cities with tall buildings or wide highways, but the quiet towns that underestimated the virus. A single infected person could destroy entire communities because there was no preparation, no warning, and no immediate understanding of what was happening. People went about daily routines, confident in normalcy, oblivious to the fact that someone they had shared a meal with hours ago was already under the virus's control. Families were torn apart in homes, shops emptied overnight, and streets grew quiet except for the occasional shuffle of feet that once belonged to friends or neighbors. It was subtle, terrifying, and unstoppable. By the time the authorities realized the threat, the infection had already traveled beyond containment, carried by the living who were unaware of their role in spreading death. Hospitals, once centers of healing, became chambers of horror. Patients strapped to beds, hooked to machines, became the first violent incidents reported. Medical staff were overrun not by sheer numbers, but by the sheer unpredictability of their patients. A nurse could be bitten, then rise moments later to attack colleagues. Hallways became battlegrounds as confusion and terror spread faster than any infection. Even after securing doors and wards, survivors found that the infected could navigate obstacles with frightening instinct. The halls echoed with screams that faded into the silence of the undead, leaving behind only the cold realization that no place was safe. Hospitals became death traps faster than any battlefield, a tragic irony in the early days of the apocalypse. Urban environments magnified the infection. High-rise apartments turned into vertical traps, each floor a potential death zone. Stairs, elevators, and hallways became channels for the spread of the undead. People barricaded themselves in apartments, hoping that height in walls would offer safety. Yet, the infected adapted, learning to climb stairs, force doors, and move in ways that were initially unimaginable. Crowds of survivors often drew attention with the simplest noise, and attempts to escape often led to encounters with herds gathering silently in lobbies or stairwells. Cities that were once thriving hubs of activity became labyrinths of danger, each corner hiding the silent shuffle of death. The urban landscape, once a symbol of progress, had become an enemy in itself. The virus does not respect biology in the way humans understand it. It hijacks motor function, neural pathways, and reflexes. Broken bones do not impede movement for long, and even dismembered limbs may continue to act independently. A person whose arms have been severed may still bite with what remains, crawling and dragging themselves toward prey. Reflexes, once trained for survival in life, become tools of destruction and death. Survivors quickly learn that assumptions about physical weakness no longer apply. Decay does not equal safety. Every motion, every shadow, every heartbeat is a potential trigger for predation. Death has evolved into an unstoppable, adaptive predator. Sound is one of the deadliest elements in the apocalypse. Even the smallest noise can attract attention from far beyond what seems reasonable. A dropped can, a snapping branch, a whispered word, any of these can summon a herd from blocks away. Survivors move like ghosts, minimizing footsteps, covering surfaces, and sometimes crawling across hallways to avoid detection. Conversation becomes a calculated risk, each syllable weighed against the potential of attracting death. Silence becomes sacred. In this new world, noise is not just dangerous. It is a lifeline for the dead, a signal to hunt and converge, a reminder that even survival requires absolute control over one's presence. The infection is resilient and adaptive to the environment. In forests, the undead crawl through dense undergrowth, maneuvering over roots, rocks, and fallen branches. In flooded areas, they wade or drift, following scent and vibrations across waterways. Even in extreme weather, they persist. Cold slows them slightly but does not stop them, while heat increases activity and aggression. Survivors must understand terrain as both opportunity and threat. Natural barriers are temporary, illusions of safety, and must be treated with constant caution. The dead do not sleep, they do not tire. They adapt to the landscape, turning the world itself into a hunting ground. Water, once a source of life, becomes a silent weapon. Rivers, lakes, wells, and even rain can carry infection over long distances. Survivors must filter, boil, or entirely avoid water, understanding that contamination can occur without contact with a single infected individual. A single misstep, a drink from an overlooked source, a minor wound exposed to water can be fatal. Every puddle, every stream, every pool becomes a potential death trap. Water is no longer neutral, it is a medium of infection, a hidden conduit for the virus, and a daily reminder of the dangers embedded in the natural world. Animals become unpredictable vectors. Domesticated pets, scavenger wildlife, and birds often spread infection further than human movement alone. Rats infiltrate shelters, birds transport contaminated matter, and domesticated animals may turn violently, attacking humans or other animals. the ecosystem becomes hostile. Survivors must observe, avoid, or even eliminate potential animal vectors. Humanity is no longer the apex predator. The infection leverages the natural world to spread. The apocalypse exists not just among humans, but across every species, challenging every assumption about the world that was once familiar. Herds are not mindless in the way one might assume. They exhibit patterns, converge on stimuli, and move with a form of instinctive coordination that appears intelligent. A single noise can trigger movement from multiple directions. A shadow can cause a group to shift silently. Survivors must learn to observe, predict, and anticipate herd movement constantly. Streets, buildings, and open spaces are transformed into shifting channels of danger. The living must think like predators to survive, using observation and timing to navigate landscapes dominated by coordinated death. The first encounters teach harsh lessons about human behavior. Panic, fear, and indecision often result in more deaths than the undead themselves. People trample each other in stampedes, make noise that attracts herds, and leave vulnerable survivors behind. Survival requires not only skill but self-discipline, careful planning, and psychological resilience. Even minor errors, moments of hesitation, or lapses in focus can turn a safe route into a corridor of death. The human mind, trained for rationality in a predictable world, must now learn to operate under constant threat from invisible, unstoppable predators. The apocalypse does not arrive with clarity. It creeps in, layer by layer, altering the world slowly enough that humanity hardly notices until it is too late. The streets that once echoed with laughter now whisper only with the shuffle of the dead. Survivors learn to measure time differently, gauging the hours by movement, noise, and the distant groans of infected far beyond the horizon. Even a familiar neighborhood becomes alien, as abandoned cars, shattered windows, and debris create obstacles that never existed before. The rhythm of life is replaced by the rhythm of survival. Observe, move, hide, repeat. Every day becomes a series of calculated choices, each carrying consequences that may only reveal themselves in the cold reality of an encounter with the undead. Sleep loses its meaning, replaced by the constant tension of vigilance. Humanity's instincts, once tuned to social life and comfort, must now operate with predator-level precision. The mind becomes a survival tool, sharpened by necessity, yet weighed down by the unrelenting presence of death that moves silently, patiently, and endlessly. Survivors quickly realize that trust is a fragile and precious commodity. In a world overrun by the dead, the living become both allies and potential threats. One careless mistake, one lapse in observation, can result in catastrophe. Supplies must be rationed, routes planned, and behavior observed constantly, not only for safety from the undead, but also from fellow humans. Communities are small, often consisting of fewer than 10 people, and leadership is situational, determined by skill, intuition, and calm under pressure. Decisions that would have seemed trivial in the old world: who to send on a scouting mission, who maintains the barricades, who watches the perimeter, now become matters of life or death. Relationships are tested, and emotional bonds are weighed against survival instincts. The apocalypse reveals both the best and the worst of human nature, magnifying courage and cruelty alike. Every interaction carries risk, every misstep may be fatal, and every choice echoes through the fragile ecosystem of the living. Noise, once an unremarkable part of daily life, becomes a deadly beacon. A fallen branch, the click of a door, or even a whisper in the wrong place can summon the dead from distances that seem impossible. Survivors must calculate every movement, every sound. Even the pace of their heartbeat becomes a factor. Speaking becomes a dangerous act, laughter a potential death sentence. Strategies emerge, crawling across floors, covering surfaces with cloth to muffle sound, and using environmental distractions to mislead the undead. Silence is no longer merely peaceful, it is survival, a weapon. and a shield. Patience becomes an art, honed to the point where even instinctive reactions must be measured against the risk of detection. The dead are patient hunters, and the living must learn to match that patience to survive. In this world, quiet is power and sound is death. The environment itself becomes a constant, unpredictable hazard. Rivers and lakes, once vital sources of life, now carry invisible threats, transporting contamination from town to town. Rain spreads infection, washing pathogens into shelters and onto clothing, while mud and debris hide dangers underfoot. Forests that once offered refuge now conceal swarms and ambush points. Even the terrain under human control, abandoned buildings, fortified homes, and barricaded streets becomes treacherous. Collapsed staircases, broken floors, and unstable rooftops are traps waiting for the unwary. Survivors must navigate with meticulous attention, analyzing every shadow, listening for every subtle movement, and predicting hazards with a combination of instinct and learned experience. Nature is no longer neutral, it conspires with the dead, turning familiar landscapes into lethal mazes. The dead exhibit forms of instinctual intelligence. Herds gather in ways that seem coordinated, moving in patterns that optimize the chance of encountering living humans. They avoid unnecessary obstacles, follow sound and scent, and sometimes pause to investigate disturbances. This behavior is not conscious, yet it presents real danger. Survivors must learn to read patterns, anticipate movements, and manipulate herd behavior to create safe paths. Even the slightest error in overlooked shadow, a misjudged noise, can trigger a cascade that turns a calm street into a deadly corridor. The undead operate on principles entirely alien to humanity, yet consistent in their logic. To survive, humans must think like predators, observing and calculating, rather than reacting impulsively. Adaptation becomes a daily ritual. Sleep becomes a strategic risk. The undead never rest, they patrol, wander, and hunt with relentless patience. Survivors cannot rely on safety during the night, or even in supposedly secure locations. Sleeping in shifts, maintaining watch, and establishing contingency plans are essential. Every time eyes close, danger grows. Mental resilience is as important as physical readiness, for panic or distraction during rest can be fatal. Dreams fade into nightmares, and nights are marked by tension and anticipation. The world is never quiet, and the mind must constantly be alert to subtle changes: the shuffle of feet, the creak of wood, the distant groan of approaching hordes. Survival becomes a cycle of vigilance, anticipation, and exhaustion managed carefully. Even a minor injury is catastrophic. Blood, sweat, and other bodily fluids act as beacons for the infected, drawing them from unexpected distances. Cuts from debris, scrapes from walls, or small accidents can attract entire herds. Bandaging, cleansing, and avoiding unnecessary physical contact become central to daily routines. The body becomes both a tool and a potential hazard. Even the smallest oversight may result in exposure and death. Hygiene and care are elevated from simple practices to essential survival strategies. Survivors develop obsessive attention to detail, understanding that mistakes are often irreversible in a world ruled by relentless predators. The psychological toll is immense. Constant exposure to death, the pressure of vigilance, and the uncertainty of safety erode the mind over time. Survivors experience hypervigilance, anxiety, and trauma that manifest in ways similar to combat stress or chronic PTSD. Some withdraw into silence, others react impulsively, and all must adapt to the constant tension of living among predators that will never stop. Mental endurance is cultivated alongside physical skill, forming a dual front of survival that is as challenging as any encounter with the undead. Humanity's strength becomes both fragile and remarkable in the crucible of apocalypse. Even familiar locations transform into threats. Homes, workplaces, and public spaces are no longer secure. Abandoned structures conceal dangers, hoard movements, or previously unknown weaknesses. Survivors cannot trust familiarity. Every space is a potential trap. Exploration becomes tactical, requiring reconnaissance, marking, and careful observation. Even a previously safe shelter can be compromised, highlighting the transient nature of security. The world becomes a constantly shifting puzzle, where adaptation, observation, and patience are more valuable than weapons or numbers. The infection does not discriminate. Children, the elderly, and the infirm can carry or transmit the virus with the same lethality as adults. Survivors must abandon assumptions about weakness or resilience. A child may move unpredictably, evade detection, and spread the virus unknowingly, while an elderly person may serve as a fatal vector. Humanity's social norms collapse under the weight of indiscriminate infection. Survival depends not on age, strength, or skill, but on vigilance, preparation, and understanding of the virus's reach. The old hierarchies of society are irrelevant, only awareness and adaptability matter. Human ingenuity evolves under pressure. Survivors develop new methods for defense, movement, and deception. Camouflage using mud, blood, and debris, noise distraction strategies, and creative barricades emerge. Even simple tools are repurposed for protection. Furniture becomes walls, clothing becomes armor, and environmental features become traps. Humans relearn survival with urgency, creativity, and desperation. The apocalypse forces rapid adaptation, teaching lessons that could never be learned in a world without constant threat. Knowledge becomes a currency of survival, experience becomes life-saving, and even mistakes provide harsh but invaluable education. The virus has a subtle intelligence, almost imperceptible in the early stages, but terrifyingly evident over time. It hijacks neural pathways, muscle memory, and reflexes, turning the infected into relentless hunters. People who were once skilled in specific tasks, soldiers, athletes, or laborers, may retain elements of their abilities even after turning. A former gymnast might navigate obstacles effortlessly, while a soldier might instinctively take strategic positions to trap prey. These remnants of human skill, fused with the virus's relentless drive, make encounters unpredictable. Survivors cannot rely solely on past assumptions about weakness, mobility, or threat. The infected are adaptable, learning indirectly through instinct and exposure, forcing humans to continuously revise their strategies. Knowledge becomes survival, but experience alone is never enough. Water becomes both a friend and an enemy. Rivers, ponds, wells, and even stagnant puddles carry the virus invisibly, transforming ordinary travel into deadly risk. Rain spreads contamination across entire streets, washing pathogen particles into homes, food supplies, and clothing. Flooded areas create unseen hazards, while survival routines around water are complicated by the threat of silent infection. Simple acts like drinking, washing, or crossing streams require extensive preparation and caution. The natural world, once a source of life and sustenance, becomes a medium of danger. Survivors must treat water as a lethal tool, a carrier of death, rather than a neutral resource. Even the most minor contact with contaminated water can compromise safety, emphasizing the virus's omnipresence. Animals become unpredictable participants in the apocalypse. Birds carry contaminated matter across cities, rats infiltrate safe zones, and domesticated pets may turn aggressive or serve as unwitting vectors of the virus. Wildlife behavior shifts, predators become more aggressive. Scavengers move into urban areas, and every encounter carries hidden risk. Survivors must constantly monitor the actions of animals, sometimes avoiding or eliminating potential threats before they become vectors. Humanity is no longer the apex predator. The natural order has been altered, and humans exist as one of many species navigating a deadly ecosystem. Even innocent contact with animals can trigger fatal outcomes. emphasizing the fragility of survival in this transformed world. Herds demonstrate terrifying coordination. Though not intelligent, their collective behavior exhibits patterns, such as converging on disturbances, avoiding unnecessary obstacles, and moving in formations that maximize hunting potential. Survivors must anticipate these movements, identifying potential escape routes and creating distractions to manipulate herd behavior. Streets, alleys, and buildings are no longer neutral space, they are living maps, constantly reshaped by the presence of the undead. The ability to read these patterns can mean the difference between life and death. Inexperienced individuals often underestimate the dead, assuming chaos or randomness, only to be overwhelmed by their instinctual precision. Even familiar locations transform into arenas of danger. Homes, workplaces, schools, and public buildings no longer guarantee safety. Collapsed structures, debris-filled corridors, and hidden herds create constantly shifting threats. Survivors cannot trust prior knowledge or assumptions about safety. Every exploration, no matter how routine, becomes an exercise in calculation, observation, and caution. Even a previously secure shelter can harbor lurking threats, requiring constant vigilance and strategic planning. The world becomes a dangerous puzzle where one misstep or lapse in observation can transform an ordinary environment into a lethal trap. Psychological endurance becomes as important as physical survival. Constant exposure to death, unpredictable threats, and extreme stress reshape human perception. Hypervigilance, paranoia, and sleep disruption are common among survivors. Even a brief moment of emotional distraction can lead to fatal errors. Coping strategies evolve. Some retreat into silence, others form strict routines, and some rely on rituals to maintain focus. Mental resilience is cultivated not as an abstract concept, but as a daily necessity. In the world of the apocalypse, a survivor's mind is as much a weapon as any physical tool or barricade. Even minor injuries become magnified risks. Cuts, scratches, and abrasions can attract the dead through scent, sound, or unconscious movement. Bandaging, sterilization, and avoiding unnecessary exposure are critical. Survivors develop meticulous routines around personal care, understanding that their own bodies are as much a liability as any external threat. Every action is measured. A misstep, an overlooked injury, or a careless movement can summon herds or compromise safety. Survival is a constant interplay between physical vigilance and environmental awareness, with small mistakes often carrying catastrophic consequences. Fire, once a tool of safety and warmth, becomes a double-edged weapon. Flames illuminate, attract, and repel simultaneously. Survivors must weigh the need for heat, light, and cooking against the risk of drawing hordes. Even distant fires can attract herds from unimaginable distances. Smoke acts as a signal, and fire becomes a strategic element of survival. Mismanagement of flames can compromise an entire safe zone, turning a carefully defended position into a beacon for predators. Knowledge, experience, and constant adaptation are required to balance the benefits and risks of fire. Hiding among corpses becomes an essential survival tactic. Survivors have escaped detection by remaining motionless, blending with dead bodies, and masking themselves with dirt, blood, or other substances. The dead, despite instinctual awareness, often overlook these human disguises, allowing for narrow escapes. Stillness, patience, and observation are paramount. Movement, sound, or even sudden breath can reveal a hidden survivor. Death becomes armor, camouflage, and deception, turning the very environment of terror into a protective tool. Understanding and mastering these strategies is critical to prolong life in a world dominated by the relentless, patient undead. Survival is not just about avoiding the dead, it is about understanding the environment in its entirety. Every city block, street corner, and abandoned building becomes part of a vast, dangerous network shaped by the presence of the undead. Survivors learn to read the signs of movement: footprints in ash, broken branches, disturbed debris. These subtle clues reveal where hordes have passed, where traps might be set, and which areas remain relatively safe. Navigation becomes a meticulous process, balancing speed with caution, awareness with patience. Even familiar locations can conceal threats, requiring constant reassessment and vigilance. The world itself becomes a map of danger, with every detail contributing to the calculus of survival. The mind must constantly interpret subtle patterns in light, shadow, and sound, learning the language of the apocalypse, where silence often speaks louder than action. Herds operate on instinct, but their behavior can appear shockingly coordinated. When drawn by sound or scent, they converge methodically, spreading across streets, buildings, and open spaces in ways that maximize hunting efficiency. Survivors must anticipate these movements, understanding that the dead respond to environmental cues, human activity, and each other. Even a single loud noise can trigger a cascade, summoning multiple herds from previously undetected directions. Movement must be calculated with precision, considering timing, line of sight, and escape routes. The living must think like predators, constantly predicting how the dead will react, creating opportunities to evade or manipulate them. Every encounter becomes a test of observation, patience, and adaptability. The psychological strain of constant threat reshapes human behavior. Survivors experience hypervigilance, insomnia, and chronic stress that permeates every action. Decisions become slower, more deliberate, but also more burdened by fear. Panic is lethal, hesitation is deadly. Over time, humans adapt, learning to suppress fear, control impulses, and think strategically under pressure. Communities that survive longest are those that cultivate mental resilience alongside physical skill. Strategies for coping with constant exposure to death emerge, including strict routines, rotational watches, and even meditation to manage fear and focus attention. Mental endurance is as crucial as agility, strength, or tactical skill. Even minor mistakes can be fatal. A dropped tool, a misjudged step, or a momentary lapse in awareness can attract the dead instantly. Survivors learn to anticipate consequences before they occur, measuring every action against the risk of detection. This extends to movement, speech, and even breathing. Every aspect of existence must be recalibrated for a world dominated by the patient, adaptive presence of the undead. Humans adapt by observing, experimenting, and learning through both success and failure. Every survivor's experience is a living archive of tactics, mistakes, and strategies, informing decisions in real time and preparing the mind for the relentless challenges ahead. Noise is the greatest amplifier of danger. From the faintest rustle of leaves to the snapping of a loose floorboard, sound carries unpredictably, drawing attention from distances that defy comprehension. Survivors develop tactics to manipulate noise, muffling footsteps, creating decoys, and timing movements to avoid detection. Even the sound of human respiration can be detected under certain conditions, prompting the development of slow, measured breathing, controlled movements, and the use of environmental masking. Silence becomes a weapon, a shield, and a lifeline. Mastery of sound management is often the difference between life and death. Water is both a necessity and a threat. Rivers, lakes, and even puddles carry contamination that can infect humans without direct contact. Rain spreads pathogens across streets, roofs, and clothing, making travel treacherous. Wells, reservoirs, and other water sources must be treated with extreme caution. Survival depends on filtering, boiling, or avoiding water, but even these measures are not foolproof. The undead exploit water as a medium, following scent trails or disturbing sediment that alerts them to the presence of the living. Everyday survival routines involving hydration, hygiene, and navigation must be reimagined to account for the omnipresent threat. Animals amplify danger in unexpected ways. Birds, rodents, and domesticated pets carry infection across safe zones. Even wildlife exhibits altered behavior. Predators become more aggressive, scavengers invade urban ruins, and domestic animals may turn violently. Survivors must constantly observe animal behavior, avoiding potential vectors and anticipating attacks. The ecosystem itself becomes part of the challenge, forcing humans to navigate an environment where threats exist on multiple levels, both visible and invisible. No species can be taken for granted. Vigilance extends to all life forms. Sleep becomes a carefully managed risk. The undead never rest, meaning that any period of unconsciousness is a period of potential vulnerability. Survivors develop rotational watches, safe zones, and alert systems to protect sleeping individuals. Dreams fade into nightmares, and nights are filled with tension, even in secure locations. The mind must remain alert even while the body rests, reinforcing hyper-awareness and fostering patterns of survival that integrate vigilance into every aspect of life. Mental and physical fatigue become intertwined challenges, testing the limits of human endurance. Even familiar objects transform into hazards. Furniture, debris, and remnants of everyday life become obstacles, weapons, or signals. Moving a chair might produce a noise that summons the undead. Leaving a door ajar can invite disaster. Survivors learn to manipulate their environment, creating safe paths, barricades, and traps while minimizing exposure. Every interaction with the physical world carries consequences, emphasizing the need for careful planning and observation. Familiarity offers no comfort, only adaptability and ingenuity ensure survival. The infection is indiscriminate. Age, gender, health, and strength do not determine vulnerability or lethality. Children, the elderly, and the infirm may carry or transmit the virus with equal potential to kill. Predicting behavior is impossible. Even the most predictable individuals can become sources of chaos and danger. Survivors abandon assumptions based on prior social norms or expectations of human behavior. Only awareness, preparation, and caution determine survival. Society as humans knew it collapses entirely, replaced by a world where instinct, observation, and adaptability dictate the balance between life and death.